WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Darryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Comment. So I hope you're all settling into the new year, getting back to your routines after the holidays slow down. We hope you're feeling good about your 2025 and heading into it ready to crush some goals and resolutions. And perhaps today's episode can offer a little inspiration. Here's what I mean. A little while ago, I talked to Boston Globe parenting columnist and food reporter Kara Baskin about her piece that looked at how local chefs and restaurateurs use their neurodiversity as a superpower. Diagnoses like dyslexia, ADHD, or just differences in learning can cause many to struggle, especially in a traditional school setting. But Kara found that the chefs she talked to thrived in high-stress, fast-paced environments. So I spoke with Kara and one of the chefs from her story, Chef Dan Bazzinotti, head chef at Boston's Blue Ribbon Restaurants and instructor at Johnson & Wales University. And I started by asking Kara about her inspiration for the piece.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I have to give a shout out to the food editor at the Globe and my parenting editor, Chris Morris, who is always so receptive to stories that look at things in slightly different ways. You know, the inspiration did not come from a food or restaurant experience for me. It did come from watching my son get interested in taking cooking classes. He's super creative. He's super hands-on. He also is dyslexic and he has ADHD, which I should say affects 1 out of every 5 kids. So this is a pretty common issue, dyslexia. But unfortunately, in mainstream schools, often it still is so poorly understood, which a lot of chefs talked about and recollected in the piece. But I see how it is with hands-on creative learning. And I thought, what better place than a kitchen to get creative and to be restless and busy. And maybe other people felt the same way as he does. And sure enough, I was right. This story resonated with so many people. I got so many sources in the restaurant world eager to speak with me, including Dan, who was so generous with his time.
And in your piece, you report that 20% of the population is dyslexic. I wonder how many other people do you know have dyslexia or is close to someone who does? And what is that community like for you?
So for me, I mean, there's a really vibrant community in terms of people who I've gotten dialed into just based on, navigating the school system with my son. In the restaurant world, I had no idea it was so prevalent until I put the call out on various restaurant and food online groups and people began responding in droves. And Dan could probably speak to more, the professional angle, but in my own personal life, so many people and probably people, in fact, who I grew up with who, back in the 80s and 90s, I'm an old Gen Xer, elder millennial.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know what to call it. It really wasn't as talked about as it is now. And I think it's interesting that in this piece, a lot of kids who came of age when I did, kids were told, you're dumb, you're slow, you can't whatever, they were insulted and made to feel less than. And I love it because it's like going back to your high school reunion 25 years later and saying, look at me now.
Dan, you're probably among that group of people going back to school like, look at me now, right? You are one of the restaurateurs who Karen spoke to. I would love for you to take us back to your time in high school when you were a freshman. Tell us about the moment where you realized like something wasn't working for you, like something just wasn't clicking with you.
Yeah, it was definitely that freshman year and, late 90s, myself being that visual, creative, experiential learner, like sitting in a classroom all day, just, I would leave the school and I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I learn today? What did I do today? And it's not that I didn't take it in, but it was just harder for me in pretty much everything. And the classes that I did do well and did understand well were the more hands-on, the sciences. So, towards the end of that year, the school put in a career advisory program. And we had to choose, hey, what did you want to focus on for your next 3 years in the high school? And, the options were, I was looking at them and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wow, I'm like 16 years old, 15 and a half years old. I don't know what the heck I want to choose right now. And So I end up at a financial advisor for 6 weeks and learning, all about how this works and stocks and oh my gosh. And I was just looking at it, walked out of there just completely like, this is not for me. And I was nervous. I said, wow, what the heck am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of friends who were going to Votech school and started researching the programs at Whittier Technical High School. And culinary just seemed to click with me. I always liked to cook anyway, and just kind of chose it on a whim. And like right away, the next year, starting at Whittier, I realized that I had made the right choice, and just being hands-on, and I was actually having fun, and I was doing better in my academic classes. And the chefs there, they get it. They could work with you and help you in the academics. So shout out to Kara for reaching out to me for this piece. I mean, we've worked on restaurants for the last probably 5 years. And when I heard about this piece, I was like, wow, I've been waiting to tell this story for like my whole life.
Well, you know what?
It's so cool.
Take us back, because you got a job at an Italian restaurant, and that's when things started to come together for you, right? Like, tell us about how cooking changed things.
Yeah. So over the summer, I decided to work at an Italian restaurant, and literally I was making salads. The owner gave me a job. I was putting together Caesar salads and garden salads. And that just turned into me eventually, working on the line and sauteing. And the chef was like, hey, you should think about going to college. I know you're in high school now, but he's like, you can go to, there's universities, there's, the Culinary Institute, there's Johnson & Wales. Like, you should do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know that, I had no idea that was an option. And that was in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are today.
And you also went to a vocational school. Tell us about that, because you mentioned earlier what helped you out were the hands-on subjects, right? Where you got to work with your hands. So tell us about going to a Votech school.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, being able to have your academics 1 week and the following week you're in your lab, you're in the kitchen.
And you're speaking to a Votech school grad, by the way.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So, I mean, being able to just focus on one thing for an entire week, it gave my brain a good mental break, and it was just fun. And then when it was time to work on academics, I wasn't overwhelmed. And chefs know where we're all coming from. I mean, they know how we learn, because most of them learn the same way. And that's kind of how it is now for me. It's like, you don't figure out how you teach until you realize how you learn. And most instructors and teachers teach the way they learn. That's just kind of the way it works. So.
Yeah. Kara, I want to ask you this question. You use the word superpower in your headline. You say that the chefs use ADHD and dyslexia as a superpower, right? I would love to hear why you framed it that way. I would love to hear you talk about that.
Because I think that what holds you back, or what held a lot of people back in their early lives, whether it was being told that they couldn't sit still, or they were restless, or they were doodling instead of paying attention, all of these things that initially maybe held them back or made them a non-traditional student, ultimately made them an exceptional culinary professional, because those are the exact skills that you need, not just in the kitchen, but in all sorts of creative fields. You need to be able to multitask. You need to be able to do a lot of different things at once. You need to think outside of the box and think, in a conceptual, visionary way. Maybe you're not doing that sitting in a classroom for 45 minutes at a time, but once you get into the real world, it's a superpower. It's your advantage. And you will find, and I've learned this, through my son who's 14, they do talk about that, dyslexia as a superpower. That's a very common phrasing in the special education world. People who are dyslexic do tend to have those traits, which maybe they don't, serve you well in mainstream school, but they will definitely serve you well in real life.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dan, what are your thoughts?
I was going to say, can I jump in on this one? Because I think a great example is like, if you throw me into a fully stocked kitchen and you tell me to make 3 dishes and get creative, and you want to see something with New Orleans flair, and you give me an hour and a half, like, I'm going to go crazy and have a blast. And like with other people, here's this book. I want you to give me your synopsis of this book in 2 hours. I can't do that, but I can, here's a whole pig, Dan. I want you to break this down into all the subprimal cuts and tell us how we make prosciutto. How do we utilize the parts of the animal that people don't want, or things like that. And, it's like, that's where like my superpower, I would say, kind of comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. And we're back with Boston Globe food reporter Kara Baskin and chef Dan Bazzinotti. Now, Kara, I want to ask you about our education system. Can you talk about how our local and state education system is adapting to meet the needs of students who have a different way of learning?
Oh boy. In my experience as a parent, and I actually wrote about this in a separate parenting column because of Dyslexia Awareness Month, I think that the experience can still to this day in 2024 be very frustrating for parents. I think that it caters to those who have the stamina to fight the system and to hire tutors or educational advocates who know how to decipher IEPs. For those of us who know what those are, individualized education programs, it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of bandwidth as a parent. And, some school systems are better than others. I think that there's a lot that has been reported on by the Globe, actually, about the literacy curriculum in Massachusetts, which unfortunately has come under fire a little bit for a variety of reasons. I think it's not easy. I think that dyslexia is more widely understood. I think we're talking about it more. I'm not sure that the education system has fully caught up, which is why I will say, as a corollary to that, the rise of vocational schools and the increasing popularity of vocational schools is really, I think, heartening to see, and actually a little bit frightening because people are competing for seats these days. But it's actually being seen as a really viable, career-worthy alternative to, mainstream to traditional industrial age, we're going to prepare you to succeed type schooling. So, it's definitely an uphill battle, but school is short and life is long. Right. So.
And Dan, to you, you're now a teacher at Johnson and Wales, where you were once a student. How are you supporting students to meet their needs?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying. I mean, you teach the way that you learn. And I think, especially in a culinary school, I mean, that's a lot of hands-on work. But, there are certainly, like I said, there's certainly students that are just, awesome in the classroom and they struggle with the outside of the classroom. Things like just day-to-day operations of a kitchen, setting up and equipment usage, terminology, when that's phrased in the moment in the kitchen, as opposed to listed in a multiple choice question, I mean, that's completely different.
Yeah.
So I noticed it because I see some students who are amazing and they have trouble sometimes with the homework or the quizzes and things like that.
They learn through the practice. You give them that terminology
Exactly.
as they're in the context with which it's used. It sticks better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's important.
It's occurring to me, you can be the most book smart person, right, in the world. You can get straight A's and be, have a million advanced degrees and have a 4.0 grade point average. But if you don't have those interpersonal soft skills, if you don't know how to collaborate with people and get along with people and how to work hard and be, persistent and resilient, which I think that having something like dyslexia or ADHD or any other sort of neurodivergence equips you with, you're not going to get very far. So I think that it actually, in a way, is an asset because you do learn some skills that are actually in the long term much more beneficial to success, because the world is full of people who are super smart, but can't get along with people to save their lives.
Yeah.
So,
tell me about
right?
it. Yeah. And Kara, so earlier you talked about this. You talked about some of the responses you got for the piece. I would love to hear some of your favorites.
Oh, my goodness. You know what? This is actually, I'm glad you asked. And this is not a chef who wrote to me. This is actually somebody who ended up, I kid you not, sent me this like 3-page long, or however you want to measure it, email. He was dyslexic. He grew up in the 60s and 70s, which, at the time you were probably called slow or whatever. It was not C. And he went on to go to MIT and he ended up going to medical school. He is a doctor now, and actually his visual spatial skills really serve him well. I think he's a surgeon, if I'm remembering correctly. And he started out by saying, this message is for your son. And, my son is actually a super confident kid who does pretty well in school and he's fine. But it felt like, oh, this is just so, thank you. Thank you for taking the time and to show me what life can look like 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. Because when you're grinding through the 7th or 8th grade, it can feel like life is one long math class. And it's not. So it was really nice that he kind of presented this picture of what life can look like down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And he's succeeding in a field that you would think is reserved for traditional learners. Well, guess what? It's not.
And Dan, how does that hit you? How would you like to respond to that?
I mean, I think that that's awesome. And the biggest thing for me is, my family is a bunch of teachers. My uncle's an automotive teacher. My other uncle is a machinist. My aunt was a special education teacher for years. I'm now a culinary instructor, but chef. I mean, I think it's just so important that, all these young people now need to realize, like, hey, look, you don't have to learn the same as other people. And I think now that the teachers know that kids don't learn the same and that everyone does have that individual kind of learning style, and you're able to adapt a little bit here and there to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And it's the biggest thing for me now, not only as an instructor, but as a dad. And, even looking back as a chef, I would do the same thing in my kitchens, training. Not everybody's going to learn the same way how to butcher a chicken. You may have to show them a video or describe it. So, yeah, I never thought way back when that I would be where I am now.
Understood. And if there's somebody listening right now who may be having a tough time in school, similar to your experience, who maybe they have ADHD, maybe they have dyslexia, maybe they just have a different way of learning, what would you say to them if they were standing in front of you?
I mean, figure out when you feel good in the classroom or when you feel like you're getting it, and try and, make those feelings happen more often and adapt to that and communicate with the people who are teaching you. If you're just sitting there and you're not getting it and you're frustrated, you feel like your skin is bubbling, as you're reading the chalkboard or, reading your nightly literature, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just read 2 pages. I have no idea what's going on. Well, maybe you need to use immersive reading. Maybe you need to hear it. Maybe that works for you. I don't know. Try it. So that's what I would say, because that's what I had to do. Trial and error. And I think Kara framed it best. It's like, life is not one long math class. Like, you're going to have to actually be a functioning person. And that's way more important than being the smartest person in the room.
And I really want to say too, IQ is not correlated with dyslexia or ADHD. It has nothing to do with that. In fact, most people who are dyslexic or ADHD or the actual marker is the test scores or the grades do not correspond with the high level of intelligence. So there's a gap there. So it does not mean that you aren't smart. It just you learn differently.
That was Boston Globe reporter Kara Baskin and head chef at Blue Ribbon Restaurants, Dan Bazzinotti. And that's our show for today. The Comment is produced by Franny Monahan. It's mixed by Marquise Neal and edited by Yasmin Ammer. Our theme music is Me by Hisu. And from the newsroom of WBUR, I'm your host, Darryl C. Murphy. I'll talk to you soon.